If you don't already know us, we're a feminist grassroots, anti-imperialist, anti-war organization working to mobilize people across the United States to expose the war machine, educate on all the ways that war is incredibly insidious and embedded into our society, and to push to defund war and invest instead in life-affirming programs. That's school, education, healthcare, neighborhoods, all the things that I'm sure all of you could think of that our money will going towards. So we're so glad that you're here to celebrate International Working Women's Day with us by learning, by rooting ourselves back in the history and the principles of this day. And hopefully you'll learn a bit from us tonight. And above all, we always offer our programming with the hope that you'll take what we give and teach the next person. So with that, I'll go over really quickly our agenda for tonight. I'm going to start with a couple, points from me about the origins of International Working Women's Day. As I say that, I realize I didn't introduce myself. Hello, everybody. My name is Jasmine. If you don't already know me, I use they pronouns, and I'm here on the CODEPINK staff. I'm one of our regional organizers, supporting lots of our local organizers around the country, and I'm a political educator. So I'm really excited to be here with you all, talking history, principles, how did CODEPINK come about, and where do we fit into this picture. After that, we're going to hear from our co-director, Danica, and our campaign manager, Makayla, about some of the revolutionary women that paved the way to where we are now, as well as some campaigns and our call to action. And then we'll wrap up hearing from Grace about bringing our feminism into the everyday. How are we actually showing up and embodying our values and our principles? Throughout the slideshow today, you're going to see these awesome photos of a couple different revolutionary women, and I challenge you to see who you can identify, who you recognize, and who you can go learn some more about. And with that, we'll get right started. So again, I would love to hear if anybody here would like to drop maybe in the chat your first time ever celebrating or acknowledging International Women's Day. Do you remember going to your first Women's March? Do you remember when you first heard about it? Maybe it was in 2016 in response to Trump's first election, right? And for many folks that brought hordes of folks out to DC and all over the country proclaiming our feminist values and rejecting everything that Trump represented, right? But if you didn't know, International Working Women's Day have its origins long before then. So in 1987 is when March was designated as Women's History Month in the United States. But prior to then, throughout the late 19th and throughout the 20th century, International Women's Day, March 8th, was being spread around the country, particularly through socialist circles. So if you didn't know, International Women's Day actually has its origins in socialism and the conditions of working women. You'll see CODEPINK over and over again repeat and use IWWD. The second and first W are both really important because it's always been about working women and the conditions of working women, right? I've done a bit of research trying to narrow down the exact origins of International Women's Day, and there are some sources who say that a garment worker strike in New York City in, I believe, 1887 is what kicked it off initially, while some sources dispute that, say it didn't quite happen that way, and instead that the idea originally emerged from some socialist conferences in Germany and in the United States throughout the late 19th century. But either way, we know that in all the places where whispers of International Working Women's Day in commemoration were coming from circles that were thinking seriously about the role of women, about the role of feminism, not just for noble and kind of high level moral changes, but instead for the actual liberation of women everywhere. And so, since its inception as an international holiday, International Working Women's Day has presented an opportunity for working women of the world to speak up about their position as multiply oppressed, right? That's by capitalism, by patriarchy, by racism and imperialism, and all the ways that these things connect, right? Many of us, maybe in college, if you are someone who went to school, you might have read your first piece by Judith Butler or Audre Lorde that identified for the first time for many of us this way that women are workers. Yes, we are oppressed in the same way that all workers are oppressed under capitalism. Our labor is exploited, our positions are exploited, right? But also the introduction to feminism, right? The idea that the division of labor, the devaluation of anything that's considered feminine or feminized, right? And all of the violence that comes with patriarchy. But together, right, only by acknowledging the oppression of capitalism and patriarchy, the fact that we are economically oppressed as women as well as oppressed by patriarchy, by racism and imperialism in the ways that they're all connected, can we move towards total liberation for all women? And so these origins are super important for us. I guess the next slide, please. So again, it's important to know that anti-imperialism, feminism, and workers' rights go hand in hand. Here at CODEPINK, we represent that message everywhere we go. We're always educating others. We show up to every women's march and women's space, bringing our message of anti-imperialism because it's important that we don't water down the origins of this day or don't elect to only promote the needs of first world, North American, European women at the expense of others, right? So true to the origins of Working Women's Day, demands during the earliest demonstrations that are very similar to what folks are demanding today included shorter working hours, an end to child labor, fair pay, and an end to workplace harassment and discrimination, right? So again, in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s, folks were demanding the same things that many are demanding today, right? We still have an incredibly wide pay gap between men and women, and then between among the races of women of the world, right? Child labor is having a resurgence in the United States. It never truly went away in many places of the world, right? In terms of this exploitative, oppressive child labor practices, right? Um, and so I know today we are at a point where, the labor movement, we're pushing beyond just the 40-hour, 5-day work week where you still are barely making enough to live, but it's really important to remember where we came from, right? What were their demands initially and how much progress has been made? So, International Working Women's Day goes beyond limiting imperial feminism that only seeks nominal gains for middle and upper class women. So, this is a day of women revolutionaries from around the world who have been at the heart of global South movements for total liberation and women's emancipation, right? For every movement during the wave of freedom movements in the 20th century across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, there were always women revolutionaries, sometimes silent and sometimes loud and right up front, who were demanding freedom for their people as a whole, right? From colonial, imperial holds and governments, but also from the oppression that they face within their communities by men, right? The societal and social constructs that create a hierarchy where women's position is only in the home, that women's opinions are not valued, women's productive labor is not valued, right? And so remembering that, again, this is a day of women revolutionaries making demands that push us to think of liberation for all. So International Working Women's Day cannot be divorced from labor history, right? May Day and International Working Women's Day are actually deeply intertwined. If you're someone who celebrated May Day, May 1st, which has its origins in the Haymarket riots, right? Another worker uprising. These commemorations are closely tied as they both bring up the ongoing fight for labor power, for equality, in a world free from capitalist imperialism, right? So again, we are constantly making the point of labor because oftentimes when we are introduced to the world of social justice from any one avenue, right, it can take some time for us to peel back the layers and get to the point of realizing, wait, all of these oppressions are connected, right? They're connected because many of these axes of oppression are ways that capitalism differentiates us between us, right? Well, you don't get access to economic opportunity and upward mobility because of where you were born or who you were born to or what your race or your gender is, right? And so all the ways that these oppressions interlock and determine how we navigate the world are all the more reason that all of our liberation movements must be pushing for the liberation of all, right? So in today, 2025 in the United States, where trans folks and trans women are being thrown under the bus, where reproductive justice for all is incredibly at risk as much as ever, right? And while those of us in the United States who are dealing with repression and oppression in many ways here are still having to also reckon with the ways that our consumerist culture, our culture of constant availability and consumption comes at the expense of often working women in other parts of the world, right? So many of us have work to do in terms of breaking down the walls and the barriers that separate us from our counterparts, international working women around the world, right? And bring us closer to a fight for labor power, for equity and equality, for reproductive justice and reproductive freedom around the world, right? We don't want one in which the feminism, the rights, the equality, or the freedom of women in one part of the world comes at the cost of somewhere else. We don't have to fall into the trap of care fatigue, right? We absolutely can care about and push for the liberation of all, can support liberation movements in other parts of the world that include women's emancipation, and continue to educate each other, right? We all have fallen for a bit of NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard, but around things that matter. Well, well, I don't want that change to happen because of who or how it might impact someone, or I want this to happen even if it comes at the expense of someone else, right? So it's really important that we're including everyone in our visions. Go to the next slide. So, like if folks aren't familiar, right, CODEPINK started in 2002 when a group of over 100 folks, mostly women and mothers, camped out in front of the White House for, I believe, over 100 days in protest of what was then the US-led invasion of the Iraq, right? These folks said, we are mothers, we are feminists who don't agree to sending our children to go make war and do murder and violence and upending another country, children and families in another place, right? And so the origins of CODEPINK and our place in the movement has always been centered around feminism, right? But centered around pushing the label for particularly US feminism to make sure that we're including those of us, not just in the US, but those of us who have for generations been under the yoke or the bombing of the United States, right? So some of these photos you see here in the middle, I pulled deep from the archive. The one on the top left and the bottom are actually from 2003, if you can believe it, early in the um, years of CODEPINK, or at least the bottom two. If you see that bottom right, Free Palestine and Boycott Remax, CODEPINK has been part of the Palestine solidarity movement for a long time and have pushed many successful boycott campaigns, right? The top right is a more recent photo of one of CODEPINK co-founders, Medea Benjamin, and Tig doing some creative direct action. And again, highlighting the fact that it's the billionaire class, it's those with class power who oppress us all. And at the very bottom, often are women of the world, right? So we invite you all to join CODEPINK in our rich tradition of uplifting revolutionary women, learning revolutionary history, and particularly the roles that women have played, and oftentimes the invisibilized roles, right? If you're not familiar with Winnie Mandela, wife of Nelson Mandela, I encourage you to do your research and learn how much he actually got from her in terms of her principledness, her intuitiveness, intentiveness, right? And she was an incredible political thinker and was so much of a heart of that movement. He Xinjing at the bottom organized the first International Women's Day in China in I also believe 1924, I want to say. Was a phenomenal revolutionary. Maria Leon is a Venezuelan socialist who we're still lucky to be learning from today. Claudia Jones is a Black American socialist feminist who really pushed for a communism and a socialism that included all women and all Black folks way early before that was commonplace. And then, of course, the revolutionary Palestinian Leila Khalid, who we again also are blessed to still have on this earth today, teaching us from her militancy and her willingness to do everything it takes to liberate Palestine. So these are just a smattering of some of the revolutionary women that we uplift that are at the core of what International Working Women's Day is about, right? All of these folks were at self-admitted socialists slash communist folks who believed in liberating women alongside liberating us all from class warfare. And we hope that you take today and this week and this month as an invitation to keep learning, to keep pushing everyone around you for a feminism that includes everyone. And we invite you to check out the stories of some of these international working women.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Yeah, it was great to get to hear about some of the incredible women who have, paved the road for so many of us to be here today. And a lot of that work was done collectively through a campaign and through, strategic planning with other people in order for us to achieve a overarching goal. So that's what I'm going to talk here a little bit about. My name's Makayla. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the campaign manager here at CODEPINK. I'm very excited to be here with y'all today and get to discuss a little bit of, our campaigns, what are our goals here, and how y'all can plug in a little bit. So, if you could go to the next slide, please, Grace. So when we think about our campaigns here at CODEPINK, our overarching goal in every aspect is to educate, right? We want to make sure that we're educating, inspiring, and activating. And so first, starting out, I really like to encourage people to start with education. Sometimes we I always like to say that we are always students ourselves. Even when we're in a place of teaching, we're still always learning. And so making sure that, whatever work we're doing, we ourselves are being educated on it, doing research, as well as putting that out into the community. And once we know something, being open to have those conversations and sharing with people so that they can get inspired and so that they can know and, feel included in what's happening, and then move them to a place of activation where they feel as though they have the education behind it. They know that they're a part, when you're learning about something, especially, it brings people together into a cohesiveness around a certain campaign. And then that way people can get activated and get in the streets. But it really is a communal act that takes us all. The next slide, please. So I want to touch on one of our campaigns, War is Not Green. So here I have a few facts, talking about the Pentagon, especially with being the largest institutional consumer of fossil fuels globally. And another fact, the Pentagon has never passed an audit, yet their budget has increased billions of dollars each year. This year, the military budget was nearly $1 trillion, and many of you were probably engaged in protests in the streets for ending war in Ukraine, ending war in the bombing in Palestine, and so many other calls for peace and calls for ending these military budgets and these fundings of horror. And we know that war is not beneficial for women, right? Like war is not beneficial for everyone, but women are continuously the ones who are taking large impacts of war, facing a lot of gender-based violence, both sexual, verbal, and other forms of assault. That we know that there's barriers to accessing resources, and especially with seeing around, there's over almost 800 million, or excuse me, 800 U.S. Military bases across the globe. And with military bases comes violence, both inside the military base, but also outside of the military base, in the communities that they're in the spaces that they're occupying. It's not just that the people are just staying on the base and doing whatever, but it's communities that are impacted as well. And you see a lot of, again, sexual and verbal violence that follow along with that. And so our campaign, War is Not Green, really touches base on a lot of the different campaigns that we have here at Code Pink, especially, getting into the environmental side of it as well. We talk a lot about climate change and, how climate change affects communities and how ecocide is genocide, and really recognizing that war is also very bad for the environment. And so it's important to really call that out. And yes, Aaron, thank you so much for putting the link in the chat. There's a War is Not Green community call on Wednesdays where you can learn more and plug in to that campaign, which it is so important because it really links to all of our campaigns and all the work we do here at Code Pink. And specifically, with thinking about, the budget with the Pentagon, we have our Cut the Pentagon campaign that really takes a look at how can we get involved in calling for divestment? How can we end the violence that comes with the Pentagon going overseas continuously, stealing resources, coming in and causing such violence and harm and killings to build these weapons and to support the different projects that they have going on. It's just it's completely insane to see how much money is going into the war economy that could be used for things like housing, that could be used for people to have resources here, like for our schools, for healthcare, for childcare, especially. We talk about losing access to safe and effective abortions within the United States. But then when they're forcing, getting rid of abortions, there's still no care for children. There's still no increase in childcare. There's still this aspect of community care that's missing and that's continuously not being funded because it would rather be funded to go and murder women in other countries, and causing such repercussions here at home as well. And so the links for these websites are dropped in the chat as well. And I would definitely encourage taking some time to go through and take a look at The different campaigns that we have, there's plenty of ways to plug in, all with the educational aspect to learn more. And if you're a part of a local, definitely getting involved in, seeing how you guys can come together and start to tap into one of the campaigns. And if you're not in a local, and definitely interested in joining, we can drop more information in the chat about that.
Awesome. Let me just handle myself. Okay, cool. Hi guys, my name is Grace. I am the engagement manager and feminist foreign policy coordinator here at CODEPINK, and we've learned such rich, awesome history tonight of IWD, CODEPINK's involvement in IWD, and then as well as some of our campaigns that are intrinsically tied to the origins of International Working Women's Day and yeah, tied to how we want to affect change through our anti-war transnational feminist values and missions all the time. So now I'm going to kind of bring that into your everyday life and talk about some of our own values, ways you can do it any time of the year, and then specifically what we're doing this year for International Working Women's Day. Also forgot to mention at the beginning, if you folks have any questions, anything you want to see touched on through the end of the night, please put it in the chat. If we have a little bit of time at the end, we'll get to a little bit of a Q&A from all of us here who are on the call. But quickly, I'm going to do a recap of some of our feminist values that if you guys tuned into one of our webinars in the past, which we'll put in the chat, we've touched on these a little bit, but they are so evergreen, so important. So I wanted to remind us here again of what our transnational feminist values should be and how they should be interacting with every call to action, every campaign, like Makayla was saying, and also every retelling of our histories, like Jasmine was saying, all of our storytelling. These values are vital for all of those things. The first one being curiosity. Find out about what's going on in other people's lives that you're organizing with. We need to trust each other to be doing this work. This work doesn't happen overnight, nor does it happen with folks that we have not had deep community with, deep understanding with, conversation with. And that builds trust, which means that you can do those direct actions with each other. You can do a trademark Code Pink action, like going into Congress and talking to elected officials. I always like to say that my best trait is being very annoying, and I've found a way to harness that trait by screaming at elected officials, and I can only do that because I trust the people I'm working with to help me build the facts and build what I want to say and how I want to interact with these folks, and then actually going forth and committing to these direct actions. Asking questions, having humility, learning why people are doing this work. We all come from such lived experiences, which bring us to this movement, which brings us to feminism, which brings us to International Working Women's Day, and learning about those lived experiences, learning about why someone came into this work, whether it be their family. A lot of our chapter organizers have children that they bring to the meetings, that have multi-generational families that come to the meetings. All of those things are very specific reasons why you are showing up every single day, why you are exuding your transnational feminist values every single day. And to learn about why everybody else is doing that is so important. So curiosity is our first and one of our most important values, and it's intrinsically tied to openness because people are going to want to know the same thing about you. They're going to want to know about why you're here, what you're coming into this movement with. And they want to make sure that in the same way as you, that you're holding on to your values while you're bringing in all of these lived experiences. We all come into it with different understandings of feminism, of anti-war, anti-imperialist organizing, of the war and peace economy. And those all shape our understanding of what the future we are looking towards, of the liberation that we're looking towards, and how we're going to get there. So you have to be open in the understanding that not everybody has the exact same belief in how we're going to get there or what the tools we need to grab onto to get to that liberation. But we all are brainstorming and we're all thinking of ways to do this. So being open with change and with constructive criticism and brainstorming and organizing in different fashions, that is all things that we need to take with us in order to be bringing forward our modes of liberation and our modes of community building. And that goes right into solidarity as being not our last, but definitely one of our best values within transnational feminisms. And that is, like Jasmine and Makayla both said, we have to do so much reckoning with how our tax dollars are being used, not to fund our life-affirming resources here, like housing, healthcare, education, but instead giving over $1 trillion to fund wars, military bases. We just had a national global call to action to close bases, right? Occupations that specifically harm women and the communities around women. And what our feminist values, our transnational feminist values, require us to not only understand what we're unpacking and what we're trying to divest here, but that is connected to all the divestment and all the work that we have to do around the world, because that's where our tax dollars are going, right? And we cannot assume that our feminism stops at our borders, that stops at where we see incarceration, where we see war and weapons going into our country, right? Because we know that I'm based in Chicago. I know that the police and surveillance and incarceration is intrinsically tied to the policing, surveillance, incarceration that's happening in Palestine right now, right? That's happening at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. And it's also intrinsically tied to propaganda campaigns that we see that are smeared against China, that are smeared against Cuba. And we have to really unpack that. We have so much work to do here, whether that be in our healthcare educational systems, but that direct liberation is also tied to the liberation of the women across the world. So we'll keep going. Just a few more feminist values and how those come into everyday practice. Every day we're working to build out our local campaigns, like Makayla said, our online spaces, like right here, our chapters throughout the world. And a lot of times we talk about these huge values like solidarity, openness, and curiosity. And then how do we put that into our everyday values, right? How does that look? How does that look aside from building solidarity, being open, being curious? What are some real tangible examples? So I just wanted to provide a few for folks to really grab onto. And then again, if folks have questions at the end about implementing this, we have myself and then Makayla and Jasmine, who are two experts on this as well, that we can dive into. But building community norms and guidelines, this is something that a lot of our local chapters have implemented. It's also something that in almost every organizing space that I've been in and that most folks at CODEPINK have been in has been a very vital tool, because again, we cannot go forward in these really intense direct actions of meeting elected officials or boycotting a weapons company or going to Netflix offices and telling them to bring back Palestinian titles. We can't do that without an understanding of trust within each other, and also the guidelines and norms that we are going to stick together by to make sure that we do this work safely and that we have each other in mind when we're doing this work. So yeah, that is both online and on the streets, and building these values and guidelines gives folks a framework for, again, how they're going to relate to each other, and also their involvement in whatever organization action or event is going to happen, as well as spots for reflection. Sometimes these events happen, sometimes chapters happen, chapter meetings happen, and harm occurs. Harm is going to occur. It's an inevitable thing that will happen, and we can either lean into building an understanding of what happened, trying to relate back to our community norms and guidelines, making sure that that harm doesn't happen in the future, but also when it does happen, that we can provide a good accountability structure to make our chapter, event, organization, what have you, stronger from that specific situation. And that goes right into educating each other, educating ourselves as peacemakers, whether we're on a delegation, whether we're building a community event. We have an obligation to share what we learned, to share what we're learning right now with International Working Women's Day history, and to educate others on how we do exactly what we do. teach-ins, community trainings on what being a transnational feminist means and looks like, and how those values are implemented into our current campaigns and calls to action are so vital, because we are doing this work to not only use these calls to action and to be strategic in wanting a free Palestine or wanting to end the sanctions against Cuba, but also to call other people in and to educate folks on why we're doing this. We need a movement of all of us to be doing this work, and bringing our values and our missions into that strategy and that outreach is what being a transnational feminist is all about. It's being accessible, it's being disarming, and it's letting folks know that we will meet you where you're at, and we will build this movement with you, again, with your lived experiences just as much as mine. And then also bringing those tools then to other feminist spaces that we see that might not have them right now. We did a lot of work prior to the election, going to Women's Day marches and bringing the voices of Palestinian families that were not included maybe in those spaces, and educating folks on that Palestinian causes need to be a direct reason and purpose for showing up for any feminist cause. We have to include Palestinian women if we're going to talk about feminism. We have to include incarcerated women when we're talking about feminism. So bringing that to spaces that might not have it already. And then Jasmine did a wonderful job of this with Abby Martin a while ago through our media literacy program, but interrogating what we read and what we consume. Like we were talking about earlier, propaganda for the war machine is in more than just what we think we're digesting via politics. It's in what we eat. It's in who we talk to. It's in where we're going to have fun. It's everywhere that we're using up space, even if it's not something that we're directly talking to about organizing, right? So anytime that we are consuming media, we're consuming pieces of legislation, we need to be not only uplifting our values and our campaigns and calls to action, but also understanding the ways in which our government and mainstream media purposely try to distract us with boring, confusing rhetoric. Danaka does a wonderful job at breaking down the reconciliation bills that have been recently coming about that actively aim to take away our rights and our support for each other, actively aim to make sure we're not doing this. We're not building community resources, community outreach programs. So yeah. Oh, okay. So now I'm just going to get into a little bit of the tools that we have for you guys for specifically International Working Women's Day this year, but also that can be used throughout the entire month of Women's History Month and throughout the entire year. These are always great flyers and resources to use, and we will be adapting them to put in our local organizing resource guide, so you can use them at any protest, any event, any community building training that you want to hold or interact with. Right now we have our International Working Women's Day flyer, and we include our theory of change and our call to action that Makayla talked about previously around cutting the war budget. And then also specifically on the backside, we have the facts and the data that we're always pulling from, right? That shows the global impacts of war, but specifically the impacts of war on women and their communities throughout Palestine, Cuba, Venezuela, Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, and then also links that tie to the bunch of other campaigns that have also lots of data and lots of outreach one-liners and talking points that you can bring to any march. And then we also have our evergreen Feminist stands for peace, not occupation and genocide. That is something that you can print out on our website that is good to bring anywhere. That again, an event that you're creating, that you're joining fellow anti-war feminists that are standing up for peace and against occupation and genocide, or if you are going to an event that maybe this messaging is not included and you want to uplift it and be that educational, disarming, accessible resource for others. And then we're always also here to help. We have local chapter support, like Jasmine said, through our peacemakers, members, online coordination. We have organizer trainings, we have local resources, monthly webinars, campaign support, and then also on our landing page that I think was put in the chat, we have our toolkit that has a specific International Working Women's Day tools and resource page that you can do all of this work specifically for International Working Women's Day. And you can get help from us to be building up those events. We have a lot of examples, and we have a lot of step-by-step programs on how to make banners, how to make these educational events, and then we're here to help you too. And there's a bunch of events that have already been curated by a couple of our local chapters throughout the city or throughout the country that you can plug into. We still have a little bit of time, so I'm just gonna quickly at the end here, and then we'll go into some Q&A, just direct us to some future events. We have a Know Your Rights training happening tomorrow. We have Missing Piece Monday with Dr. Rupamara, and we have Women in Conflict Zones, kind of the end of our International Working Women's Day programming that'll happen on the 19th with Danaka and a couple of organizations. And we have a bunch of International Working Women's Day events happening on that landing page. And you can work with any one of us to build one of your own, either in a chapter that you're already working with, or if you want to start one of your own chapters. We have a bunch of tools and resources to build that up too. And we have a bunch of resources to get involved directly in our chapter organizing. So I'll stop my screen because I cannot see the chat, but I think Danica said she was going to chime in with a question, so I will.
Oh no, I said if people have questions, I'll chime in.
So sorry. Yeah, if people have questions, please feel free. Oh, thank you, Cynthia. Thank you so much. Any questions?
I always say if there's no questions, that means we just must have obviously done a great job at explaining ourselves. But yeah, Kara, go ahead. You got to unmute, sorry.
I'm sorry, I realized I might not be good. I'm in a restaurant. Are you guys doing any environmental actions and combining social environmental issues anywhere in the country? And also, do you have any chapters up here in Washington State?
To answer the second question,
You can mute me again.
You're good. We're working on a chapter in the Portland area if you're there, if you're somewhere else in Washington, but we'll be down to help us start a chapter. I'd love to connect with you on that. I'll drop my email in the chat. But Makayla, we'll talk about Wing.
I think we tried getting a Seattle chapter going. Jasmine did that.
There are also, oh, sorry, I'm dumb. I said Portland and you're in Washington. Yes, Seattle is what I meant. We do have folks in the Seattle area, again, trying to get a chapter up and going, so I'd love to connect with you.
Hey, Jasmine.
Yes.
Sorry. I was going to email you today because I finally got my group rounded up. I talked to you, I think, well, it was during the inauguration, and it's taken everybody a month to settle down for those of us in Washington State. So that was actually the first thing on my to-do list today, was to send you an email about when you're available. I've got everybody else's schedule that's been herding cats with everything dropping out of the White House, I guess. You know.
I'm super excited to support y'all and get y'all organized. I'll definitely email you back first thing.
Thank you.
For anybody who is interested, if we don't have a chapter in their area, we're always super excited to start new chapters. It's not a ton of work. We also don't give directives. We're not going to come in your community and tell you what to do. We're all about supporting, providing resources, and organizing coaching. So definitely reach out to us if anybody's interested in organizing locally. But I saw Julie had a hand up.
Well, for some reason, I don't have the name of this film, but I'm in New York, and there's a film on Saturday evening at 5:30 at the People's Forum, and I think that's in conjunction with CODEPINK. Sometimes I get things on the calendar, and I think CODEPINK is either a sponsor or one of the sponsors of that, but I don't have the name of the film.
Aaron, you're here to put you on the spot. Would you know our New York organizers on the call?
Yes, yes, CodePink is, New York City is putting that together. Yeah, it's in the chat. It's Layla and the Wolves. If anyone's in the New York area, come by. There's going to be some awesome speakers as well, and it's in conjunction also with, or in partnership with, the Palestinian Feminist Collective and Affirm NYC.
Everybody check out our events page. We have IWWD events happening all over the country. Here in Dallas, we're signed on for a big rally that we're taking part of. New York has a film screening. Some other cities are doing lots of things. And if you haven't organized anything yet, it's never too late. You and some CODEPINK homies could always do an art build on International Women's Day. You could always go tabling, hand out flyers, and talk to folks. Sign on or show up to your local women's march, bringing the anti-imperialist, anti-war message. So there's so many ways to get plugged in this Saturday. Any more?
Yeah, we've been encouraging people to go out to the events that are happening, especially, if you're in a local or not, showing up in pink and being able to spread the message of including, everybody is included in our feminist values. It's not siloed into a specific group. It means the women in Palestine, it means the women in Sudan and Congo, and all oppressed areas around the world. So it's really great that we're able to show up and touch such a wide base range of people. And so it's important that we do show up and get our messaging out there.
Any other questions, folks? And yeah, if you see, we have that toolkit and we have a bunch of examples and past International Working Women's Day. In Chicago, we did a banner drop a couple years ago, and now that banner has kind of traveled around the world. I do think it was taken at one point, so we don't have it. But if you have any other examples that you think would be good to put on the site that you do end up doing this year, we will definitely use it for our toolkit next year. So email any of us and we'll put them up there. Yeah, Danica?
Yeah, just for our past IWDs, I will say our big beautiful banner that we had for IWD in Chicago, Detroit Police Department, I have a bone to pick with you. They still have it as evidence of what? I'm not sure. But anyway, I just really, really want to encourage people to, like, if you're in a chapter, work with your regional organizer to get those flyers printed that Grace presented on. There is nothing more satisfying than intervening in like a traditional sort of liberal International Women's Day event where you live. It's like you don't have to organize an event. You can just intervene in their messaging there. We did this for the Women's March, and for those of you that were there, it was so fun talking to people and kind of trying to bring them around to our outlook on everything and making them see themselves as a part of like a worldwide community of women rather than just being women inside the United States. Because like we have so much more in common with women in Gaza and Cuba than we do with like women in the American ruling class. So it's really fun to talk to people at those things. It can be intimidating, but it's some of the most important work that we have to be doing right now. And I can't emphasize that enough. Like we have to be getting out of our bubble. We have to be talking to people that we don't normally find in our spaces. So cities, like the city halls usually organize some sort of International Women's Day event. Sometimes like the Democratic Party where you live will put something on. So just try and look on your like city website for Women's Day events. If it's not on International Women's Day, it could just be at any point in March. So I really, really encourage it. It's great to meet people and like we've won people over in those spaces. So please, please check out those flyers.
Thanks, Danica. I won't keep you spotlighted unless you want to pop back on. But yeah, please use those flyers. We have them as PDFs and as JPEGs that you can download on our website. So you can either print them or you can be sharing them online. Throughout the day, we'll be doing both in-person local events and we'll be all over our Twitter and YouTube and Facebook. So there's so many ways to get involved. It doesn't have to just be in person. But yeah, like Danica said, it's the most fun to be interacting with folks who expect us to maybe be coming with a different kind of interaction. And we're very disarming. We're wearing pink. It's very fun. It's very like people are always like think that we're gonna approach it in one way, and we're just very like kind, excited, happy-go-lucky people that just want to bring people into our movement and want to be disarming and want to be educational. And folks are a little bit caught off by that sometimes, but then actually like we have very good conversations. Like Danica said, even if we don't agree on absolutely every single thing or how to get there, we can agree that the Pentagon budget is so inflated and that most of our money is not going to funding the people and funding the needs of women and funding the needs of their families. And instead, it's going to the bombing and the surveillance and the criminality of women and their families throughout the world. And that's something that most people can agree on. We'd want to bring that money home, right? We'd want to be bringing it and using it for our own funding and our own communities. And that's a very good, easy foundation to lie with people to then be bringing up our calls to action and our campaigning and the work that we do locally and globally and making it transnational with folks. So yeah, great addition, Danica. Do folks have other questions? Yeah, it's like Makayla said in the chat, it is like, it's so disarming just to know that you're not alone in questioning these systems, right? And to be wondering about this. So we get to be that kind of corner for folks who maybe are just coming in because they are just hearing about Palestine, just hearing about how much money we send to Israel and weapons companies and intelligence and whatnot. Maybe have just heard about our Bases Off Cyprus campaign and are just getting involved there. Maybe have just seen Medea online badgering politicians and trying to be disarming throughout the halls of Congress. And it's a lot to take in when you know that there are so many people behind you and so many people that are ready to take action with you and to build that trust with you and to meet you where you're at and to not be gatekeeping this information, because that's not how we build a movement, right? I need to get things together. Oh, thank you, Edmund. Sounds good. Yeah, other folks, Jasmine, Makayla, any other closing things you want to talk about?
No, I just echoing what folks already said about letting unlikely conversations guide you. The path forward for our movements is gonna have to be one of out organizing the right, because they've been out organizing us in some ways, right? And out organizing them looks like stepping into spaces we aren't usually in and reaching folks who are finding themselves under attack for the first time, stepping in and connecting with folks who are becoming aware of their place in the whole world for the first time, right? So many people are recognizing their positions as taxpayers, as consumers, as global citizens, right? And it's on us to capture them, to bring them into the movement, to bring them into action, to inspire. So I really hope that that spirit of International Working Women's Day stays with folks throughout the year, and that we use this as a reminder that there's always someone else we can be thinking of to bring up with us in our movement, and that we should be working hard to make space for everybody. Because I'm in a different book club, and we just finished reading Thomas Sankara's Women in African Liberation. Thomas Sankara was a Burkina Faso revolutionary in the 80s. And he just lamented over and over again how the revolution is never finished if women are not included in it, if women are not also emancipated, right? And so there's just so much work to be done, but rather than be overwhelmed into despair or inaction, please welcome all this learning and all this history to invite you to find out what else you can commit to and how you can commit to bringing about liberation for all. I see Danica wants to share.
Yeah, sorry. Someone asked me a really good question in the chat that I just wanted to highlight. Someone said, "What are the vibes with?" They sent it to me privately, so I'm not going to say their name. But what are the vibes with talking to like people who want to keep sending money to Ukraine and don't want negotiations in Ukraine on Palestine? That's been brought up after hearing about a big turnout. We've been attending events. Some feel funny about like going to a Ukraine protest and talking to people. Um, Generally, I'll be quick. Be strategic with like where you're doing this outreach. The IWD events are typically not political inherently, so that's a great place to go talk to people, I think. If you're going to a protest that already has sort of like a political edge that's not ours, that's not like our ideology, you might be met with like a lot of hostility. So is it worth doing that? Maybe not. Generally, if you're like talking to someone like that, um, and they aren't on the offense immediately, and they're being like curious and open-minded, just try and find common ground and work from there and like a logical next step. Ask questions about like why they believe the things they do and not an accusatory, non-judgmental way. Kind of try and get the gears turning in their head is generally my approach to dealing with that kind of thing is just be curious about their position, try and find common ground, and then work from there. But if they're just like aggressive off the bat, probably not worth it, in my opinion.
Thank you, Danica. Makayla, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I was gonna say that was a really good question and really good points, Danica, because I definitely think it's important to engage in conversation, and coming from a place of really thinking back and some of us, maybe have done complete 180s when looking at, our lives and where we've gotten to and the things that we've learned over the years as we've gotten older, and the communities that we've gotten involved with. And so kind of come with that same empathy towards people and compassion when you're going out in these spaces where you might be met with more hostility of people don't know what they don't know. And that's exactly why we're here, because we have the understanding, we have the access to the information. And being honest when you don't know something, it's okay to say you don't know. We don't have to, we are not scholars in every aspect. And so being honest with people, I don't know, that's a good question. And doing this research together, that's part of the struggle. And so if you're feeling motivated, to get out there this weekend and share the messaging of an anti-war feminist movement, definitely look at the resources that were put in the chat and feel free to reach out, because that's exactly what we're here for, is to offer support. And if there's any questions, even just in support in going through, how to have a conversation with somebody. And if you're nervous about that kind of confrontation, it's okay to say, okay, thank you, and walk away. But definitely building community is important, and that takes having those conversations. So
Thank you, Makayla and Jasmine. I think those two closing statements tied with Danica's was a great way to close us out for tonight. If you missed any resources, if you missed maybe something that we said or something that you wanted to write down and you didn't have a chance to, we will be sending the recording and all of these resources in a follow-up tomorrow. And we are in constant International Working Women's mode this entire week and this entire month, honestly. Honestly, every single day of the year is kind of like International Working Women's Day for Code Pink. So we're always doing this. So feel free to shoot any of us an email about this work, about how to get involved specifically on Saturday. Like Danica said, a lot of this programming is going through the entire month, and you can also build out these programming if you don't see one in your city, in your chapter. We would love to plan that with you and just think through, yeah, where can I bring this messaging? Where will it be the most strategic to be educational, disarming, accessible to folks? Where am I going to get kind of my corner to be building these bridges with folks, and to making our feminist values and mission statements most appealing and most accessible to other feminists throughout the world and throughout my city or my community. Right? And so, yeah, I'm just going to send one more time the events that are happening throughout the month. Tomorrow, myself and the National Lawyers Guild are going to be putting on an event around Know Your Rights. Like we said throughout the entire night, you have to be building trust and also making sure that you're keeping each other safe when doing these really big direct actions or doing any action. You want to make sure you're going into it with folks that you trust and folks that know that they have you and you have them, and they have the frameworks and the instructions to be dealing with the cops, to be dealing with anti-protesters, to be dealing with anyone who might try to get in the way of you being that educational, accessible force, right? So we have that tomorrow. We have a Missing Piece Monday with Dr. Rupa Mara, who we have right now an action for. She was put on administrative leave for talking about Palestine and talking about ending the genocide and in Palestine. So we're going to be talking with her about healthcare workers here in the United States being in solidarity with folks in Gaza and healthcare workers in Gaza, talking about surveillance and detention there as it relates to here as well. And then we also have, to round out our month, Women in Conflict Zones webinar with Danica and a bunch of other amazing orgs like World Beyond War. So we have so much programming, and we want to help you build yours too. So again, feel free to email us. I'll put my email in the chat. I think other folks have put their email throughout the night, but please get in contact with us. There's a million events that are already happening that are on that landing page, and we'd love to build yours out with you as well. But if folks are good, I think we'll close it out. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.